Well, are you ready for Chapter 3? GI Dogs, Prisoner of War? Yesterday, in Chapter 2, we found out that Judy is really good at warning them of danger, not only in the water, but in the air and on land when they came across that leopard when they were walking through the forest. But Chapter 3 is called Puppy Love. By July 1937, the Japanese stopped simply acting aggressive and started bombing Chinese cities. It began with a small battle, which they used as an excuse to drop their bombs and bring lots of troops into China. In August, the Imperial Japanese Army set its sights on Shanghai. 1 million Japanese soldiers, backed by Japan's Navy and Air Force, were on the outskirts of the city. Planes dropped bombs on the Chinese, and they were forced to abandon Shanghai. On the Yangtze, we were untouched. Well, at least for now. But it was hard to see our Chinese friends suffer. Our job hadn't changed. It wasn't England's war to fight, so we continued patrolling the river to protect English merchant ships and English citizens in China. We teamed up with an American gunboat, the USS Panay, and stuck to the river's main channel between Shanghai and Hankow. We avoided the places farther inland with their steep gorges and wild, unprotected lands, not to mention pirates. I liked the Americans and they liked me. One night we were all out in one of the small riverside villages when the Americans decided they liked me so much they wanted to keep me. At the end of the night, they brought me back to their ship. I could hear poor Tanky stumbling around the riverbank calling my name. I barked to let him know where I was. "I'm here, Tanky, with the Americans." Those silly human ears of his didn't hear me. Tanky didn't know where I was until the next day. A villager who did some work on the Panay saw me and let him know. Tanky demanded my return. "We don't have your dog," the Americans lied. "She must still be in the village." I don't think the Americans would have kept me forever, but their trick was going on too long. I had a good time at first, but they fed me some pretty good chow. But I was tired of being hidden away below decks, and I missed my men. That night I heard quiet, sneaky noises, but they weren't pirate noises. I suspected it was Tanky, so I didn't bark. I smelled him first, and then I heard him slip aboard like a pirate. "I'm here, friend. Come and find me." But instead of searching for me, Tanky stayed on deck. "I hope you're playing a trick to get me back," I thought. The next morning, the Americans got out of bed to discover that their ship's bell was stolen in the night. "Gotcha!" After much conversation and worry that they would get into trouble with their skipper, the Americans sent a signal to the Gnat. "Boarded in the night by pirates, ship's bell stolen." The Gnat replied, "We were also pirated of Judy. We'll swap one bell belonging to USS Panay for one lady named Judy. Property of officers and ship's company of HMS Gnat." The exchange was made a few minutes later. The Americans walked me down the gangway, and we met Tanky and the bell on the deck. I jumped on Tanky and gave him a good lick. You can't blame the Americans for wanting me, but I was loyal to my men, and they were loyal to me. I hoped the two ships would have many years of fun together, but the Japanese, with much of China now under their power, soon turned their aggression on us. In December 1937, the USS Panay left us to sail to Nanking to evacuate the Americans still in the war zone capital city. The gunboat was carrying members of the American embassy and escorting American cargo ships down the Yangtze. Suddenly, bombs started falling all around them. 3 oil carrying ships were hit and set on fire. And the Panay, the ship where I had had such a jolly time during my dog napping, sank to the bottom of the river. Most of the people on board made it to safety on the lifeboats, but the Panay would never sail again. On the same day, Japanese airplanes zoomed out of nowhere to drop their bombs on our sister ship, HMS Ladybird, and the British steamships she was protecting. Then they let loose with big guns hidden on the riverbank. The Bee raced to her rescue, but the Ladybird had been hit repeatedly. Some of my friends were killed. Many more were injured. Everyone was shocked and angry. The American and British governments protested, but the Japanese said the attacks on our ships were an accident. They claimed that they had mistaken our ships with their big American and British flags painted on their sides for Chinese gunboats. That's a big fat lie, I thought angrily. In the end, Japan accepted responsibility and repaid the governments for the ships. But life became a lot more difficult for the Western ships and the Western people in China. Still, it was worse for our Chinese friends. Nanking fell to Japan on December 13. We heard terrible reports about what was happening to the people left behind, but we were powerless to help. The next year, 1938, was full of small clashes with the Japanese. We made sure to fly our British flag, but we were always ready to open up our anti-aircraft guns if we had to. It wasn't unusual for Japanese officers to board the Gnat and other Western ships looking for Chinese who might be in hiding, or because they believed that they had been insulted in some way. I had never forgotten that it was Japanese sailors who had gone after me when I was a puppy in Mr. Sue's shop, and I could tell by the way they looked at me now that most of them would have done the same thing. "Just try it," I snarled. "I'm a lot bigger than I was then, and so are my teeth." It wasn't long before Tanky and Jeffrey started confining me below decks whenever the Japanese came on board. I thought the Japanese were my biggest problem, but then I learned I would have to say goodbye to my best friends. My favorite humans had to leave the Gnat for new ships, including Tanky, Jeffrey, and Oliver, the man who had saved me from the river when I fell overboard. Each of them gave me a good pet before they left, and I licked their hands one last time. It was sad, and I knew I would miss them. But I was the ship's dog, so I had to stay with the ship. "I'll take care of the Gnat," I told them. "Those new humans are going to need me to show them the ropes." And they did. 2 of the new men who came on board, Seaman Law and Seaman Bonnie, for Boniface, showed some promise as best friends, so I spent most of my time with them. They were the ones who noticed when I fell in love. French and American gunboats, the Francis Garnier and the USS Tatuila, I'm not sure how to say that, had docked opposite us in Hankow. Even though there was still tension with the Japanese, the sailors had a good time together. There were parties and rifle matches and a lot of teasing. There was also a very handsome English pointer on the Francis Garnier named Paul. Paul was so handsome, in fact, that he looked almost exactly like me, just bigger. Paul took one look at me and fell in love. Who can blame him? But I played hard to get. I spent a lot of time showing off to get my attention whenever I was on deck. I'm sorry, let me reread that. He spent a lot of time showing off to get my attention whenever I was on deck or on the riverbank, running from one end of his ship to another at top speed. He was running so fast one day that he flew right off the bow and into the harbor. "Help!" I barked. "Dog overboard!" I ran down the gangway with Bonnie right behind me. The harbor wasn't anywhere near as rough as the choppy waves that I had fallen into, and Paul was a strong swimmer. He swam right toward me, and Bonnie pulled him from the water. I felt sorry for Paul and licked his face to make sure he was okay. And that's when I fell in love. Even the humans could see we were made for each other. That afternoon, Bonnie and a few of the other sailors sat me down for a talk. "We've decided you can get engaged today, and if all goes well, you'll be married tomorrow," Bonnie said, "but only on one condition, that you name your first pup Bonnie." I agreed, of course, and Bonnie slipped a silver anklet over my left paw. "That is your engagement ring," he said. The next day, Bonnie and one of the French sailors married us. All of the humans cheered and clapped. "I am pleased to pronounce you—" Bonnie stopped and looked around. "What should I call them?" he asked. A Frenchman yelled, "One! Call them One!" "I am pleased to pronounce you One," Bonnie said. And that's how I became a married lady. Paul and I had a 3-day honeymoon on the Gnat, and then Paul was led back to the Francis Garnier. He protested, but I understood. We were ship's dogs and had to stay with our ships. He would have company soon enough, our puppies. I was happy to become a mother, but I was scared for my pups because they were born during a war. Japanese warplanes flew overhead to bomb Chinese cities nearly every day. The Japanese kept their promise to leave the Western gunboats alone, but I snarled at the sky every time the warplanes went by. Planes thundered across the sky the very day my puppies were born. 10 beautiful English pointer puppies. Only this time, the Japanese dropped their bombs in the river all around us. "Help!" I barked, circling my body around my brand new puppies. "Help!" It was as if the Chinese heard me. There was a different buzzing sound, and Chinese fighter planes chased the Japanese away. Whew, we were safe. For now. Once again, the Japanese claimed it was an accident. Another lie, I thought. My puppies grew strong in spite of the Japanese. Everyone from the surrounding ships came to admire them. It wasn't long before they were exploring every corner of the Gnat on their chubby little legs, just as I had explored Shanghai. Watching them made everyone happy, something we all needed more of with war waging all around us. Too soon my puppies were big enough to leave me. One dog was a fine mascot for a gunship, but 11 were too many. I knew my puppies would have to join ships of their own. So when the Francis Garnier came back to Hankow from operations downriver, I was happy to see 2 of my pups go to live with their father. Others went to protect the British consulate in Hankow and 2 American ships. I was sad for a while, but I knew they were doing important work. Monsoon season, a time of great winds and heavy rains, was nearly upon us when the Japanese overran Hankow in October of 1938. The sailors did their best to keep me away from the Japanese troops, but I kept up my personal war against them. One day I was out for a run along the river with Bonnie and Seaman Law when I stopped to snarl at a Japanese sentry. He screamed and raised his foot to give me a kick, but I danced out of his way. Then I rose up on my hind legs and growled at him. "I'm not afraid of you, kicker." He grabbed his rifle and leveled it at my head. Okay, I thought, maybe I'm a little afraid. Before I even had a chance to run, Seaman Law grabbed the sentry in a big bear hug and threw him into the river. "Take that, you kicker." The sentry rose up sputtering, and we ran for the Nat. We all had a good laugh about it later. But our skipper didn't think it was as funny as we did. For the next few days, I had to hide out while Japanese diplomats and officers came aboard. It took a lot of meetings, but they finally decided that they wouldn't go after Bonnie and Law as long as I stayed on the ship and didn't bother, the Japanese troops, at least when we were at Hankow. "It's okay," I told Bonnie. "It's worth being cooped up just to see that Japanese sentry get thrown in the river." We did our best to do our job and patrol the river over the next month, but seeing the devastation around us caused by the war was tough. More and more of the country was bombed into surrender by the Japanese. It wasn't long before the British government decided they needed newer, bigger, more powerful ships on the Yangtze in case they had to fight the Japanese. I would have to say goodbye to the Nat and become the mascot on a new gunboat, the HMS Grasshopper. And that is the end of chapter 3. And if you remember from the prologue, it's the Grasshopper that they're on when he is taken prisoner. If you remember when I read the prologue on day 1 when we read chapter 1. But we'll find out more about that tomorrow in chapter 4.